Welcome to Reformed Thinking. This is our deep dive where we take historical and theological source material, all the commentaries, all the research, and we try to bring the core ideas straight to you.
Yep. The goal is to cut through some of the dense academic language and just get to the good stuff.
And today we are getting into a really gripping piece of scripture, Psalm 11.
We are. And many of the sources we've been looking at, they actually call it the Song of the Steadfast.
The Song of the Steadfast. I like that.
It's good, isn't it?
Uh,
And they spend so much time just pulling apart David's, his calm and his courage in a situation where literally every instinct and everyone around him was just screaming, run!
And that's the thing, right? That conflict between what seems rational, what your survival instinct tells you, and what your spiritual certainty tells you. That's why this is so interesting. So our mission today is to figure out why David refused what seemed like the only sensible advice he was getting: to hide.
We're going to stick to the theological arguments, the heavenly anchors that kept his faith solid when the actual structures of his society were just crumbling.
And we'll follow the structure of the psalm itself. So first we'll look at the crisis, the temptation he faced in verses 1 to 3.
Right.
And then we'll make the same pivot David does and look at the arguments for courage in verses 4 through 7, which are all about the unshakable reality of God's character.
Okay, let's start there then. Let's set the scene. How bad was the danger David was actually in?
Well, it was life and death. This isn't just, some political friction. This is King Saul, a paranoid and violent king, actively persecuting him.
The sources have that line about Saul hunting David as a partridge upon the mountains.
Yeah, and that analogy tells you so much.
How so?
Well, think about how you hunt a partridge. You chase it, you drive it from cover, you wear it down over rough terrain until it's just exhausted and has nowhere left to hide. So it's relentless, it's targeted, it's designed to completely destroy him.
Absolutely. David was living in caves in the wilderness for years, constantly on the move, never knowing if he was safe.
And it wasn't even an open, honest fight. That's what makes the advice from his friends so understandable.
No, it was treacherous. The psalm says the enemies had the bow bent and the arrow fitted to the string.
Ready to go.
Ready to go. And the goal was to shoot privily, in secret, at the upright.
So we're talking about ambushes, betrayal.
Exactly. That phrase, shoot privily, points to how rotten Saul's court was. It was full of spies and people looking to get ahead by betraying David. The danger wasn't from an army on a battlefield.
It was from a knife in the back.
Or a false accusation, a legal trap. It was aimed at the upright in heart, the people trying to live honestly.
The sources we looked at call this whole thing an unequal combat.
And it was. I mean, you have Saul with the entire government on his side, the army, the authority, the political machine.
All of it. Pitted against what? David's naked innocence?
Right. When the very system of law is trying to kill you, the power imbalance is, it's absolute. It really makes you wonder,
What's that?
if the state itself has gone rotten and wants you dead, how long can naked innocence actually hold out?
And that kind of thinking, that political reality, that's the soil where the advice to flee starts to grow.
It is. Which brings us to the pressure from his own people, his friends.
Who are giving him what the sources call the advice of cowardice. Which sounds harsh. I mean, isn't telling your friend to run when he's outnumbered just good sense?
That is the central question, isn't it?
Really?
And the sources argue that this advice was, it was disguised. It came under the garb of friendship.
It used plausible logic.
Totally plausible. They tell him, flee as a bird to your mountain.
In other words, use these pusillanimous expedients, these small, timid strategies.
Yeah, if you're a defenseless bird and the hunter is setting a trap, flying away seems like the only smart thing to do. It's just worldly wisdom.
But the sources say there's something else going on spiritually.
They do. They call it a stratagem of distrust.
A what?
A stratagem of distrust. The idea is that when the devil can't get a believer to fall through obvious sin, he'll often use people who mean well,
His friends,
to argue him out of his confidence in God.
So if David runs, it's not just moving from one cave to another. It's a spiritual act. It's a surrender.
It's a breach of duty. It would be a public declaration that he doesn't actually trust Jehovah to be his refuge.
So he'd be abandoning his post because of, what's the phrase, a drizzling mist of danger.
Forgetting the sun is right behind it. Yeah. His friends are looking only at the facts on the ground. Saul is strong, David is weak, the system is broken. So logically, you run.
Which brings us to their big closing argument, the giant objection, you called it.
Yes, from verse 3.
Mm.
If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do?
And that's not just them being dramatic. They believed they were stating a fact, a cold, hard truth about the total collapse of their society.
They were. The foundations here means the institutions, the ordered structures that give a nation stability and a moral compass. And when they're gone, all you have left is rubble.
So our sources break down two main foundations that were destroyed under Saul.
They do. Let's start with the first one, the legal ruin.
Okay, so the foundation being destroyed here is the laws and constitutions, the whole idea of the rule of law.
By the end of his reign, Saul was the law. There was no other standard. It was just his erratic will.
The sources describe his government as being run by moody, cruel wit and arbitrary tyranny.
Think about what that means. The person who is supposed to uphold the law is the one breaking it constantly. Justice itself, as a concept, was just gone under Saul.
So a righteous person couldn't appeal to a judge or a court or some written codes.
There was nothing to appeal to. Imagine that for David. He can't get a fair hearing. He can't hire a lawyer. The laws about kingship or inheritance mean nothing because Saul's personal paranoia trumps everything.
Justice was absorbed by a raging flood of cruelty. I thought that was a powerful image.
It is, because when that happens, the righteous man is helpless. His hands are tied. The entire legal ground has been washed away.
So if the courts are corrupt and the state's power is turned against you, yeah, the argument to flee starts to sound incredibly convincing.
And that was just the first collapse. There was a second one, and it was maybe even more terrifying for them.
The religious ruin.
Right. And this foundation was shaken by a specific, horrible event in their history, the massacre at Nob.
We really have to grasp the scale of this. This wasn't just a random act of violence. This was Doeg the Edomite, on Saul's orders, killing Ahimelech, the high priest.
And 85 other priests with him.
85. He basically wiped out the authorized center of religious life in Israel.
It was a direct attack on the spiritual infrastructure. The priests were the ones whose lips shall preserve knowledge. They were the keepers of the covenant, the teachers of the law. They were how you sought God's guidance through things like the Urim and Thummim.
So by killing them, Saul wasn't just killing men. He was trying to sever the connection between Israel and God's guidance.
He'd already destroyed the civil law, and now he was attacking the covenant law. The visible structure of their faith had been, it was decapitated.
So for a faithful Israelite, this would feel like an earthquake where both the government and the church have become sources of chaos, not order.
Exactly. You've got these dismal days of national confusion. Everything that was supposed to be solid law, government, religion, it's all been uprooted.
The righteous person feels paralyzed. There's no moral or legal ground left to stand on. And the advice to just run, get out while you can, it sounds inescapable.
It does. It absolutely does. If you only look at what's happening on earth, the advice is perfect worldly advice.
But David does something else.
He does something radical. He refuses to accept the premise that earthly ruin means final ruin. He completely changes his frame of reference.
And that's the big transition in the psalm, right? He stops looking at the rubble around him and he starts borrowing his light from heaven.
Yes, he fixes his mind on the great central orb of deity. He moves from the chaos on the ground to God's unchanging reality in heaven.
And this reality, it's built on 4 theological pillars, or anchors.
It is. And the first one is a direct response to the advice to run to a mountain for safety. The first pillar is God's universal presence and his intercession.
So David says, Jehovah is in his holy temple.
And that's the key. His friends say, flee to your mountain. David says, in effect, my God is in his temple.
So God isn't tied down to one place on earth that can be destroyed like the priesthood at Nob was. He's present everywhere.
And the sources point out that by saying temple, David is making a claim that God is the God of the dangerous valleys and battle plains, just as much as he is the God of the safe hills.
So if God is right there with him in the danger, why would he run to some lesser refuge like a cave on a hill?
It's illogical. Why trade the infinite safety of God's presence for the very finite safety of a hiding spot?
But why the word temple? Why not just say God is everywhere? Does the word temple add something specific?
It does. It points to mediation. The sources immediately connect this to Jesus Christ, the ultimate high priest. David is looking beyond any earthly building to the heavenly reality.
So Christ is in the heavenly temple, pleading his precious blood.
Right. And that changes everything for David. Because if the great intercessor is active in heaven, then no secret plot Saul comes up with, no clever trap.
Nothing can be devised that the high priest won't discover and ultimately defeat.
And that intercession is what keeps faith from failing. So even though the foundations on earth are gone, the connection to the source of stability above is perfectly intact. The lines of communication are open.
So presence is the first anchor. What's the second?
It's the logical next step. Absolute sovereignty. David declares, Jehovah's throne is in the heavens.
This is him appealing to a higher court. The king on earth, Saul, is a tyrant. But the king in heaven
is the world's great emperor. His throne is in the heavens, which means it's above and in control of everything happening on earth.
So the theological point here from the sources is that nothing in heaven, on earth, or in hell happens without God either ordaining it or at the very least permitting it and overruling it for his purposes.
Exactly. Saul's rage might be loud, but it's not supreme. It's on a leash.
So the persecution isn't just random, meaningless chaos. It's controlled chaos.
It's disciplined, it's regulated, it has limits. And because David understands that, he sees there's no real need for a cowardly retreat.
So instead of running, he can actually stand his ground. He can salute God as Jehovah Nissi, the Lord my banner.
And raise the shout of war.
Mm-hmm.
His courage isn't just him being brave. It's the logical conclusion of his theology. It's based on who's actually in charge.
There's that great analogy of the ship that the commentators use.
Oh, it's perfect for this.
Yeah.
David's friends are looking at the visible parts of the ship, the masts, the sails, which are like the government and religious offices.
And they see them getting torn apart by the storm. So they're shouting, "Abandon ship!"
Right. But David refuses to unanchor his ship. He's not going to run because of a drizzling mist. He trusts in the ship substantial of God's presence.
He understands that the real stability isn't in the parts you can see, it's in the unseen hull.
He stays close to the keel. The keel is the spine of the ship. It's underwater, you can't see it, but it's what keeps the whole thing stable. So when Saul destroys the visible masts of the kingdom, David just clings tighter to the invisible, unshakable keel of God's sovereignty.
His safety isn't based on the condition of the government.
Not at all. It's a total reversal.
Yeah.
Man looks at the rubble and sees only ruin. David looks up, sees the true king is still on his throne, and that makes the earthly chaos not irrelevant, but manageable.
Okay, so if God is present and sovereign, how does he actually interact with what's happening, with the oppressed and the oppressors?
Well, that brings us to the third pillar, the divine inspection, the nature of the eternal watcher.
The line in the psalm is striking. His eyelids try the children of men.
It sounds so precise. What's the meaning behind God having eyelids? It suggests a kind of intense, focused watching that's way more than just a casual glance.
Okay.
Think about what we do when we want to see something small or distant very clearly. We squint, we contract the eyelids to focus wistly and accurately on one tiny object, and it blocks out everything else.
So God isn't just generally aware of the universe. He's squinting, focusing on David, the individual being hunted, and on Saul, the tyrant plotting against him. It's a singular focus.
That's it. God is looking at David's suffering and his enemy's secret plans as perfectly as if there were no other creature in the universe.
And for David, who is being hunted privily, in secret, that has to be a huge comfort.
Immense. It means his suffering isn't being missed, and his enemy's schemes aren't hidden.
The sources go even further with this. They say God's observation is like anatomizing the soul. That sounds invasive.
It's surgical. It means God is looking at the very entrails of the soul. He's not just seeing actions. He's prying into the reasons, the motives, the goals behind the actions.
He sees right through the fig leaves of outward profession.
Right through the tricks and sleights of false religion. So Saul can claim he's persecuting David for the good of the nation, but God sees the envy and the moody, cruel wit that's really driving him. God sees the nakedness of duties.
It's the ultimate court of appeal. When earthly justice is gone because the judges are bought or the evidence is fake, God's inspection is the one place where the truth is always seen.
And it's totally impartial. Exhaustive.
But this intense gaze, this trial, it works differently for different people, right? It has a dual function.
It does. For the righteous, like David, it's not about destruction. It's about purification.
The commentators say, "The Lord trieth the righteous. He doth not hate them, but only tries them."
So the trial is actually an act of love. It's like a touchstone or a refining fire that separates the gold or dross in a believer's character.
And if the righteous person stays put when the foundations collapse, they're willingly entering that fire. What's the benefit of that?
The sources say these trials are the channel of many blessings. They make you holy. They take abstract ideas about God and make them real. The promises in Scripture, which maybe you took for granted, suddenly become sweet.
And prayer gets new life.
Because the trial forces you off of your own strength and onto the anchor of who God is.
So if David had run to that mountain, he would have dodged the very process that was meant to deepen his faith and get him ready to be king.
He would have. But that same intense gaze that refines the righteous person, it does something very different to the wicked.
It's a judicial exposure.
Yes. For them, God's eyelids are like a judge looking down at a criminal in the dock. The judge is reading the characters of his wickedness printed in his face.
He's gathering the evidence for condemnation.
And to make sure that no evil, no matter how secret or clever, can escape the eye of justice. The guilty want to hide, but the judge is focusing on them with this deliberate, meticulous intensity.
So understanding that distinction, that his own suffering is temporary and purifying, while Saul's success is just camouflage for his coming judgment, that's a huge part of why David stays.
It is. Why would you feel the people who are already under divine investigation, whose case file for condemnation is already being prepared?
They might win in man's court for a while, but they can't fool the eternal judge.
Yep.
And that leads right into the final pillar of David's confidence.
Right into pillar 4. A deep confidence in God's moral nature, which makes justice unavoidable. David's final point is, the righteous Lord loveth righteousness.
It sounds so simple, but when your whole world has collapsed legally and morally, that statement it's radical.
It is. It's saying that justice isn't just something God does, it's essential to the very being of God.
He couldn't not be just. To fail to defend what's right would be to deny himself.
That's it. If the highest being in the universe is defined by justice and holiness, then the whole cosmos is bent toward correcting the wrongs done by men like Saul.
And that certainty is what allows David to stay put. He knows judgment is delayed, but it is absolutely fixed. And that leads to the description of what's in store for the wicked.
The judgment reserved for those God hateth, which here means the violent, the oppressors.
And it begins in a strange way with what the sources call a rain of snares.
It's a terrifying concept. It means God often allows wicked people to have worldly success, to get wealthy, to have power. But these things aren't blessings.
They're traps. The prosperity itself is the snare.
Yes, they're meant to fatten them up against the day of slaughter. The comfort and success that violent people get in this life is the very thing that keeps them from ever thinking they need to repent.
Their good things are a bitter sarcasm. So Saul's throne, his power, his temporary success in chasing David, all of that is actually part of his condemnation.
It lures him deeper into his pride and his false sense of security, which just makes his eventual fall that much worse. The snares isolate the wicked from any chance of escape.
And when that time for accounting finally comes, their ultimate portion is delivered. The horrible tempest.
That's their entailed estate, their inheritance.
The language here is so graphic, a fiery deluge of snares, fire, and brimstone. We are talking about the eternal consequence of fighting against a righteous God.
The commentators compare it directly to the destruction of Sodom, but, lasting forever. They also use the image of the simoom wind from the desert.
That's a powerful picture. What is that?
It's a sudden, hot, poisonous whirlwind that just scours the life from the landscape. It leaves nothing behind but death.
So it's total, overwhelming, no escape.
Total. And the final image is of a cup of torment that the wicked have to drink. And not just drink, but wring out the very dregs, the sediment at the bottom.
They have to consume every last bit of God's wrath.
A cup of misery, but not a drop of mercy. The full price of justice has to be paid.
And the contrast with the upright is what gives David his final note of courage. The psalm ends, "His countenance doth behold the upright."
So while God looks at the wicked as a judge gathering evidence,
he looks at the upright with complacency, with delight.
Yes, it's not just a passive look, it's active favor, it's approval.
Because God sees his own image in them, the reflection of his own holiness, and the person who chose to stand firm, who refused to use carnal expedients or take crooked byways to save his own skin.
And knowing that you have the personal active approval of the sovereign of the universe, that cements David's resolve. He'll take the hardship, because walking the straight path guarantees communion with him in glory.
The short-term loss is nothing compared to the long-term gain.
Nothing.
So David's choice to stay, it wasn't a military calculation at all. It was entirely theological.
Completely. It was anchored in these 4 certainties: presence, sovereignty, omniscience, and justice.
And when the foundations that men build, their laws, their religious structures, when those fall apart, The righteous person can appeal directly to the throne of God.
His true refuge isn't a mountain on a map that can be surrounded. His refuge is the unshakable, eternal mountain of God's own character. That's the only bedrock that holds.
Which really brings us full circle back to the beginning. That core temptation David was facing was, as the sources put it, the temptation to shun a trial.
And in doing so, to miss the blessing that God had wrapped up inside of it.
So here's a final thought to leave with you. Consider this. The trials that we are tempted to run from, maybe it's a crisis at work or some kind of social pressure, or seeing our own cultural foundations start to shake, what if those are God's chosen channel of many blessings?
What if they are the very refining fire, the touchstone, intended to prove the substance of our faith? If you choose flight over steadfastness, you might dodge the immediate pain, but you might also be sidestepping the very spiritual refinement that God intends for your soul.